Greetings and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. You know, there's been a lot of videos online this year about the so-called Revelation 12 sign that will appear in the sky on Saturday, September 23rd, 2017. And given what I've experienced with the Minnesota church over the past several years, I thought I should comment on this. The reason is because Christians' responses to this Revelation 12 sign seem to have been more consistent with the great apostasy of the church than with true Christianity. And I'm not hearing anybody talking about that. It seems like most Christians are taking one of two extreme sides on this issue. They either totally disbelieve the Revelation 12 sign and scoff at their Christian brothers and sisters, or they believe it completely, yet the response to that sign has been most un-Christian-like. I'd like to address that here as a warning for the church at large to avoid falling into that kind of self-serving, inhumane apostasy that the Minnesota church has fallen into. And by the way, if you want to know what I've experienced with the Minnesota church, then please watch my videos called To the Church in Minnesota and The Mark of the Beast is Already Here. But in this video, I'm going to focus on a couple of very important aspects of this Revelation 12 sign that other people just don't seem to be talking about. You know, when you're driving down the road, there are signs posted everywhere. And when you walk into a public building or an office building, there are signs everywhere. And the purpose of these signs is first and foremost to inform us. These signs are meant to provide information that we will use wisely for our individual benefit and for our collective benefit. For example, using information on a sign, we can reach our true destination when we might have gotten lost without the sign. Or maybe the sign will warn us of danger to protect us from harm. I remember back in college, I had my car totaled because an inattentive teenager plowed into my car when she drove the wrong way down a one-way street. And can you believe it? You know, after the crash, she got angry and claimed that the accident was my fault. That is, until the policeman kindly showed her the sign that she had failed to pay attention to. But once she finally saw that sign, she knew she had no defense. She had no excuse. It was her own fault and nobody else's. And so it is with the signs that God provides for us. And yes, that includes signs in the heavens, in the sky, in the stars, in the constellations. Way back in the beginning, in Genesis 1, verse 14, which described the creation of all things, the Bible tells us, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also." That last clause is one of my favorite statements in the Bible. Oh yeah, by the way, he made the stars also. You know, humans have spent 6,000 years combining all of their own creative powers to come up with the most ridiculous and complicated explanations for where those trillions of stars came from. And after all that effort, and after all the books they've written, after all the studies they've peer-reviewed, after all the money they spent on research and technology to study the stars, after all that, the best explanation they can come up with is that, nothing suddenly exploded into everything. or at least that some undefined so-called singularity exploded into everything. And then they can't even tell us where that singularity came from in the first place. However, to drench this intellectual excrement with perfume so it smells sweet to the masses, they've created a complex system of modern epicycles that rely on theoretical mathematical ideas like chaos theory and string theory. And they spend billions of dollars to build the Large Hadron Collider. All of this busy work allows scientists to demand that people believe them on blind faith alone because, ordinary simpletons like you and me just aren't smart enough to comprehend the complexity of these brilliant ideas. It really is an academic exercise in foolishness and corruption. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 warns about this when it says, "Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness." The Bible makes things so simple when you just humble your intellect before your own Creator. He made the stars also. It was as simple as that, and it never was more complicated than that. He did it with His Word. But the thing is, I fear that with things like this Revelation 12 sign, Christians are doing much the same thing that these scientists do. Let me repeat that previous statement from Genesis. "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and years." In other words, the reason God put all those stars out there was for our individual benefit and for our collective benefit. They are signs. They give us information. They inform us. For example, they allow us to keep track of the days and the years, and even the hours. They allow us to keep track of the seasons so that we know when to plant and when to harvest, and so we know when we should begin bundling up for winter. But they serve another purpose also. In another one of my favorite passages in the Bible, Psalm 19 tells us, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth His handiwork." In other words, just like that girl who rammed into my car, the sign that condemned her was sitting right there the whole time. It wasn't hidden. It was right there in plain sight. She could blame anybody she wanted to, but she had no excuse. And people who can look at the night sky and believe that there is no God that created the universe, well, they're doing the same thing. They are simply refusing to pay attention to the obvious. They are, in fact, what the Bible calls willfully ignorant and without excuse. Psalms 14 and 53 state the matter quite clearly. "The fool hath said in his heart, There is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good." Just like all those signs you see around us in this world, in the Bible, the purpose of heavenly signs above all else is to inform us. Sometimes it's to announce an event. For example, the Star of Bethlehem announced the birth of the Messiah. Sometimes it's to verify a prophet's authenticity, like when Moses was dealing with Pharaoh, or when Elijah called down fire from heaven before the prophets of Baal. Sometimes these signs are to warn us of coming judgment. And, just like those balloon signs that wave in the wind outside your local mattress store, signs sometimes exist for no other reason than to just grab your attention, so you'll think about something that maybe had not crossed your mind in a long time. Now, lunar and solar eclipses are natural phenomena that occur often. We can even mathematically predict when they will occur. What makes an eclipse special as a sign from God is its timing. The blood moon tetrad that occurred over the past few years did not appear to signal an imminent event, but it sure did get many people's attention, and it inspired them to think about Bible prophecy. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, perhaps for the first time. Then the more recent total solar eclipse that traversed the entire United States helped to focus our attention on a specific period of time. That eclipse seemed like just another random natural event, but it occurred on August 21st, and that's exactly 1 month before September 21st, which is Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets. Now, that fact alone doesn't really mean anything either. But the thing is, it turns out that there are a whole bunch of things that are pointing to the Feast of Trumpets this year, including the Revelation 12 sign. So, beginning with the attention grabber of the blood moon tetrad, followed by the American solar eclipse, which might be pointing to a more specific date, you can see how signs in the heavens might possibly lead people who are watchful to focus their attention where God wants us to look. These signs are right out there in the open, in plain sight, but they are mere amusements to people who care nothing about Bible prophecy. You can only benefit from these signs if you pay attention to them. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on what all of these signs are here. There are hundreds of videos on YouTube that already do a good job of identifying this myriad of signs and convergences. My concern in this video is how Christians themselves are responding to these signs. Now, here's the thing. In the past couple of years, a whole movement has risen up on the internet regarding this Revelation 12 sign. And if you don't believe me, then just go to YouTube and search on the phrase Revelation 12 sign. You're going to get hundreds of videos. I myself first learned about this sign while I was still living in my car in the last Minnesota winter. And at that time, I was being completely ignored by the Christian church, which I went to for help. Members of the church were only concerned with themselves, and they didn't have time for helping other people, except to pawn me off on government agencies while feeling very proud of their charity for doing so. Now, I left some comments at that time on a few of these Revelation 12 sign videos. My comments were meant to draw attention to what I believe is the most significant sign of the end times that there is or ever could be: the falling away of the church into apostasy. I mean, seriously, what could be more significant of a sign than the body of Christ itself being corrupted by satanic influences? And yet, the responses I got ranged from yawns to some very nasty criticisms of me for publicly exposing problems in the church. One thing I didn't receive from any of these people was help. I was living in my car in a Minnesota winter. So the problem I've had with this Revelation 12 sign movement from the very beginning was not the sign itself. It was the behavior of so many Christians who were following that movement. It was obvious that many Christians were becoming increasingly obsessed with this sign, as if nothing else mattered anymore. It was kind of like they had found what they thought was a sign from God, and since it came from God, it was acceptable for them to hide inside their prayer closet and just forget about all of their responsibility to maintain the church's holiness and integrity. I'm not only talking about helping the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the homeless, but these people didn't even seem interested in spreading the gospel anymore. It was as if this sign had given them permission to just end their mission, focus on me, myself, and I, me, and focus all their attention on preparing for the rapture. But worst of all, many of the leaders of this movement themselves seemed to show little or no concern for the gospel or for good Christian behavior either. In my opinion, some of them were setting a very bad example for Christians, even as Christians began clinging to them and regarding them as anointed prophets. And that's pretty scary, because that, my friends, is the definition of cult behavior, not Christian behavior. The leaders who arose around this Revelation 12 sign often came across as self-centered, self-absorbed, and arrogant. In some cases, it is obvious that they were deliberately using proven cult-building techniques to create a following for themselves, using the Revelation 12 sign as their construction vehicle. To illustrate just how serious a problem this is, consider this. In the latest video from Scott Clark, the main proponent of the Revelation 12 sign, I'm sorry, but he looked like a crazed, furious madman. He spent several minutes literally shouting into the camera without a smile or even the slightest hint of joy in his heart. I mean, he literally looked and spoke like Charles Manson, complete with the long hair and the ragged beard. It was really creepy. Yet, hundreds of his followers immediately defended him as an anointed man of God in the comments for that same video. We're talking about a guy here that no one had even heard of only a few years ago. But rather than chastising him for his anger and for making Christians look like crazed lunatics, they praised him for his passion instead. Again, this is cult behavior. This is not Christian behavior. Now, I want to emphasize that to Scott Clark's credit, he did take down that video within 24 hours, and he even went ahead and issued an apology of sorts. But the fact remains that prior to his apology, there were hundreds of comments within 24 hours that defended him. Not because he was right. I mean, he himself apologized. They defended him because he was Scott Clark, the great prophet of the Revelation 12 sign. He was being looked upon as an infallible leader who could do no wrong. And again, this is pure cult behavior. This is not Christian behavior. Without even worrying about what Scott Clark himself did, this cult-like behavior among his followers should absolutely terrify Christians who are paying attention to the most significant end-time sign, the apostasy of the church. Once again, the church has found an acceptable distraction that eliminates their need to behave like a holy entity, which shines a bright light onto a darkened world. And instead, it allows Christians to focus all their attention on this sign and what it could possibly mean. The thousands of Christians who are fascinated by the Revelation 12 sign, they're not protecting and defending the church. They're not protecting and defending America's 3 million homeless people, or the poor, or the widow, or the orphan. They are not protecting and defending the unsaved by spreading the gospel. These people are protecting and defending themselves by protecting and defending a tiny handful of YouTube video warriors who return the favor by tickling their itching ears with a daily or weekly update on how God is soon going to carry them away to paradise in the rapture. Now, don't get me wrong, please. I'm not saying that there is nothing to this so-called Revelation 12 sign. As a matter of fact, I have found dozens and dozens, possibly hundreds of truly fascinating signs and convergences, and they do in fact seem to point to the Feast of Trumpets in 2017, the period from September 21st to 23rd of this year. And these signs are important, and we do need to pay attention to them, but not at the expense of transforming the church into a bunch of self-absorbed hermits who spend all their time in their bedrooms watching YouTube videos while the world collapses all around them. Think about it for a moment. If all these signs are in fact telling us that the rapture is coming soon, then this means that all those people who will be left behind at the rapture are very soon going to experience the worst case of hell on earth that this world has ever seen or ever will see. We are talking about billions of human beings who are about to endure an incomprehensible magnitude of pain and suffering. And yet, the church isn't even talking about them. It's as if the church doesn't even care about them at all. And when you consider that the church cared absolutely nothing at all about me throughout my 2 years of homelessness, well, if Christians can be that negligent toward their own brothers and sisters in Christ today, how can we imagine that they care anything at all about unsaved people who will be left behind at the rapture? And yet I have to ask the question, are those the kinds of Christians that you would expect God to want to carry away to heaven in a rapture? Something is dreadfully wrong here, folks. Scott Clark has posted videos where he shows stacks and stacks of male gifts, donations he's received at his home. It was Christians who sent him all of that mail and encouragement and gifts and donations. These supporters even had to go through the effort of handwriting or typing and printing and then mailing all of those letters. They had to go through all that effort for him. And yet, for 2 years, while I lived in a car throughout 2 Minnesota winters, while posting videos showing my misery and contacting hundreds of churches for help, I received email encouragement from approximately 2 strangers, and I only just now received my very first donation recently. Yet my life was at imminent risk the entire time, and my homeless consultant videos were exposing the evil hypocrisy of people who exterminate and exploit the homeless for their own benefit. In other words, Christians offered their overwhelming support to a brother who did nothing more than post videos that personally made them feel really good and hopeful when he didn't even ask for help. Yet those same Christians did absolutely nothing at all for a brother who posted videos which exposed just how evil and corrupt this world really is. And I was literally begging for help to survive. Does anybody see the problem with this? In Matthew chapter 7, beginning with verse 21, Jesus said, "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils? And in thy name done many wonderful works? And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity." Here, let me give you what I think is probably the best analogy or illustration for what is going on here. And I'm talking about the Saigon airlift, where the last Americans were carried away to safety at the very last instant of the Vietnam War. At that time, the North Vietnamese were right outside of Saigon, and in fact, they had already bombed the airport. America had to launch the largest air evacuation in history. They removed 7,000 people in one day, in 24 hours, right in front of the South Vietnamese that they were leaving behind. Those people being left behind were about to lose their freedom and be invaded by a vicious communist dictatorship. Does that sound anything like the rapture and the people who will be left behind to live under Antichrist regime? In the Saigon airlift, there were basically 3 distinct groups of people. At one end of the spectrum, there were the technicians who just obeyed orders. You know, the embassy staff and military pilots, they only had time to think about the job that they needed to do right now, and they could worry about the moral implications and other people later. At the other end of the spectrum were the countless people who were being left behind. Their hearts failed them for fear as they realized that the positive force which had restrained their enemy for so long was suddenly leaving them alone and undefended. But somewhere in between these 2 extremes was a much smaller group. These were people like the American ambassador. Those people they both took care of their technical jobs, their to-do list. They did their job well. But at the very same time, they also went the extra mile to help as many people as they could. And they even put themselves in mortal danger, if necessary, to do that. Their hearts bled for the people they were leaving behind. The military actually had to give an order to physically arrest our own ambassador and carry him to safety because he refused to leave, because he cared so much about the people being left behind that he didn't want to leave. 4 decades later, we can watch documentaries where those technicians talk about their intense guilt and shame and the nightmares they've experienced after they did their job. You know, when they finally reached safety and had time to think about what had just happened. They spent the rest of their lives saying to themselves, if only I had done such and such, we could have saved more people. If only I had done such and such, I could have saved more people. That's agonizing, folks. At the same time, many of the people who are left behind are still bitter and angry. To this day, they can't believe that America just left them behind like that with no warning to suffer the loss of their freedom, rape, pillaging, and who knows what else at the hands of the communists. But what about that group that fell somewhere in between? Well, the ambassador died many years ago, but the ones I saw who both did their job while being willing to violate orders and go the extra mile to save others, well, let's just say that they were the most at peace with themselves. And they had the least amount of guilt, the least amount of shame, the least amount of anger, and it's because they truly did all they could do under the circumstances, even at their own risk. And the same thing is happening right now as Christians are becoming obsessed with the rapture on the Feast of Trumpets. They feel a sudden sense of urgency like they never have before. After all, if this is real, then this is it. This is the blessed hope that the Bible talked about thousands of years ago. They are the generation that will experience this unimaginable supernatural event of being swifted away to heaven without ever dying. They will be the people who leave others behind to endure tribulation like the world has never seen before. And yet, what are most Christians doing with this sense of urgency? They're watching YouTube videos and joining cults of personality that form around the most well-known video makers on this topic. They're shutting themselves in their homes and screaming, "God, I'm ready. Take me off this rock right now. Get me out of here. Me, myself, and I. Me, me, me." They don't even show the slightest hint of concern for other people. For all of those billions of people they're going to leave behind. The people making videos about Revelation 12 sign rarely, if ever, even bother to mention the gospel, as if the gospel didn't exist anymore. They're like the technicians in the Saigon airlift. They're trying hard to focus on what they think is their job right now at this urgent moment, and then they can worry about the ethics and the morality of it all. They can worry about all those other people when they get to the safety of heaven. At the other end of the spectrum, we have not only unbelievers, but in fact, most of what we call the Christian church, who are completely oblivious that any of these signs even exist at all. Those are the people who are going to be left behind. And make no mistake about it, they are going to hate and despise those Christians who escape in the rapture, because those people did nothing to try to save them. They just abandoned them. Those Christians were too busy hiding in their prayer closet and praising YouTube Christian personalities to get out and spread the gospel while there was still time. They were too preoccupied with getting off this rock right now to worry anything about the poor, the widow, the orphan, the homeless, or the unsaved. And somewhere in between are those of us who are trying so hard to find a proper balance between the preparations we have to make for a possible rapture to heaven and the work that we still need to do while our feet remain on the ground of this earth. Now, as I've researched all of these signs and thought about what they mean, and as I've prayed to God for understanding and discernment, my emotions have wavered all over the place. They've gone from ecstatic joy and anticipation over a possible rapture to deep, deep sadness over the terrible judgment that people who are left behind are about to experience. My heart just aches for them. They have no idea what they're in for. Whether the rapture occurs this week or if it occurs 100 years from now, when it happens, the people who are left behind, they have no idea what they're in for. It's going to be horrible. But I've also experienced an awful lot of just plain depression. And the reason for that is because I'm watching these Christian so-called leaders try to get the church to focus on the Revelation 12 signs so much that they lose all sight of everything else. And when I see that, the whole thing, it almost begins to look like a deception, doesn't it? Again, as I said at the beginning of this video, it isn't the sign itself that bothers me so much as the behavior of people who call themselves Christians. So, As far as I'm concerned, the rapture might occur a few days from now. I'm recording this on September 22nd. Or it might occur 100 years from now. I don't know. The only thing I know for certain is that the rapture will occur someday. I know this because the Bible, the inspired word of the Creator of all things, told us that it will happen. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 46, beginning at verse 9, God makes this perfectly clear. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Yea, I have spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I will also do it. I hope this video gives Christians who are obsessed with the Revelation 12 sign something important to think about. If the rapture is in fact imminent, then God will make certain that it happens at His appointed time. Should you be watchful for the rapture? Yes, of course, absolutely you should. But should you become obsessed by the rapture? No, of course not. You still have work to do while your feet are on the ground. The question Christians should ask is not, when will the rapture occur so I can get off of this rock? They should be asking God, how can I serve you most effectively while I'm still here on earth? And they should just trust that God will deliver them to heaven in His own time and in His own way. I'm sorry, Christian, but the rapture will not happen to rescue you. The rapture is going to happen because it is a necessary part of God's plan for this world. At some point, you need to learn the distinction. Now lastly, to close out this video, regarding what the people who are left behind in the rapture are going to face, I want to play you out on this video with a song from a Christian rock band called Barnabas. This song is called Waiting for the Aliens, and they recorded it way back in the early 1980s. And when you look at the state of the apostasy of the church today, especially the infiltration of all these satanic New Age ideas into the church, you really have to marvel at just how prophetic this 35-year-old song really is. So I urge you to listen to the lyrics, read the lyrics, I'll put them up on the screen, to this song very carefully, and think about what you can do today to help save those who are going to be left behind in the rapture from falling for this kind of a deception.
They say it's gonna be alright. If all I keep a food, we have been down the last hour. citizens will swear eternal allegiance to the new order and begin required identification procedures. Insubordination in regard to this directive, as well as any liaison with unlawful religious gangs operating throughout the globe, will be terminated swiftly and without mercy.